to hear Sheri. Okay. Um, so Sheri Glucoft Wong has been working with our community for about a year now. She's done. She was here last year to talk with parents about supporting their students, supporting their children. She has met with our faculty and staff to do some training on supporting students in the classroom as well as supporting families. She works with schools and educators and in other arenas I'm sure that I'm unaware of, all over California and beyond. She is a licensed clinical social worker by trade and works with families and children in supporting parenting and supporting kids. We are thrilled to have her again this year. It was so valuable and enriching, at least from my perspective, to hear her multiple times. I've seen her at other schools and been able to be at all of her presentations here at UVI, and I find myself telling other people what I have heard from Sheri over and over again in conversations. Leading with empathy and get curious, not furious, and other such
Find your spot. Find your spot.
Find your spot. So you'll hear about some of these things, I'm sure, this evening. So without further ado, this is Ms. Sheri Glucoft.
Hi, UVI parents. It's great to be here. Just so I know who I'm talking to, how many of you have pre-K kids? Preschool kids. How many of you have kindergartners? Wow. First graders. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth.
Hey. Oh.
How many of you have kids older than that? How many of you have kids littler than preschool? Oh, wow. Okay. So what I'm talking about tonight absolutely applies to kids of all ages, the minute they get social. And what I want to talk about is your role in your kids' social lives. And while you play a central role in influencing how your kid navigates their social lives, you don't have a central role in creating their social life. Making friends is something they have to do for themselves. So you can't provide them with friendship, but you can prime your kids for developing positive relationships with their peers. And you do that two main ways. One is by valuing and encouraging relationships. And the other is by nurturing the attitudes and practices that help them express your values about human relationships in the way that they relate to their peers. So first I just want to talk a little bit about the value of peer relationships for your kids, just so that you understand that. Because there are things that can happen with peers that can't happen, that it needs to be a horizontal relationship, not a vertical one, for certain things to happen. One is the chance to learn reciprocity. Parents just don't require reciprocity from kids. For some reason, they just don't do that. Not the way that kids do. And in a while, at some point I want to talk about single kids in a family where there's just one kid. So there isn't a built-in peer dynamic, and how parents do need to kind of step outside their role a bit and require some more reciprocity so your kids get practice with that at home. Peer relationships also give your kids a chance, friendships in particular, give your kids a chance to develop a self-image and a sense of their role with others that is outside of their role in the family. The way I think about this is that in family life, it's kind of a fixed menu. You know, you're the oldest one, you're the youngest one, you're the one with the sense of humor that jokes, you're the one that gets in trouble, you're the one that helps. You know, people get into roles and then people expect those roles, and I'm going to talk about that too. But it gets kind of fixed in family life. At school and in the bigger social world that your kids are in their sports, parties, in their neighborhoods, it's more of a smorgasbord. It's not a fixed menu. They have a chance to try on different ways of being and see how those work. Another thing is that it's a chance to learn the rules of human nature. I like to tell the story that when I'm talking to parents about setting limits and home being the training ground for how the world works, I talk about these families. I'd like to say I once saw a family who, but I've actually seen many dozens of families who have a morning like this, where everybody rushes to get ready, and you got to get one parent to BART, the other parent's got to get to work, one kid has to go to one school campus, the other kid's got to get to their preschool, everybody rushes, they get in the car, the 4-year-old says, but I wanted to be the one that opened the door, so they all get out of the car, and go into the house, and that thing can open the door. See, that's only going to happen at home. That isn't going to happen anywhere else. Nobody but the parents are going to do that. So the way kids are going to learn about human nature, really human nature, is from peers. The other thing is that you say, well, they've got peers at home. Can't they learn that from the other kids at home? Well, older kids tend to be kind of forgiving of certain things of littler kids. And little kids adore bigger kids. So they're pretty forgiving. Peers, not so forgiving. So we got to work on that. But the good part about that is that kids understand, gee, if I always hog the ball, no one's going to want to play with me. It's their chance to figure out how that works. So it's also, it's sort of the give and take of relationships that kids get to learn about with their peers. Now I want to talk about how that doesn't always go so well. So sometimes kids are mean. And I just want to start right off talking, because I want to tell you something. We're not going to be talking about bullies tonight, because I don't like to label kids in any way, by the way. I don't even like to say, you're a generous kid. I like to say that was a generous thing to do. Because if I say you're a generous kid, then that kid starts to organize a sense of themselves around that definition. They're being defined. So I'm a generous kid. So now I have to be generous all the time. You know, it's not always appropriate to be generous, and kids have to figure that out. So whether it's generous or untruthful or whatever, rather than label the kid, I talk about what just happened. I do let them know that that was a mean thing to say, but I don't say you're mean. But there is meanness that goes on, and sometimes there's been periods in our history where there's been waves, where there's been a culture of meanness. There's been periods of time where mean was just in. All the comedy on TV was mean, all the humor, you know, the humor was mean. Cool, mean was cool. I think that we've moved past that. I hope we stay moved past that. But what's important to know is that my experience, and I've been doing this for 4 decades, and John's right, besides working with educators and parents, I've worked with just about every kind of person that works with kids. I've worked with librarians and pediatricians and firemen who are big brothers, and police and crossing guards and every kind of people that work with kids. And one thing I've learned is that no kids are mean to be mean. Mean is not an ends. I want to be mean. Mean is a means. It's a means to not be vulnerable. It's a means to be powerful. It's a means to have control, because it's uncomfortable for you when you don't have control. You don't know what to do with yourself, but you know how to manage controlling. By the way, bossy, that's another thing, is it's really important to think twice when you see kids that are bossy, that you're calling bossy, because sometimes there's, kids' behavior always makes sense if only you have the rest of the information. So some kids actually have a very tough time following directions. It's just the way they process, it's hard to track. And if they're in charge, then they know how the game goes, because they just made it up. But if they have to follow someone else's game, that's harder. So what looks like somebody being very top doggy is really them coping with feeling underdoggy. And so rather than going at that kid with criticism and aggression, you want to go with them toward them with some compassion. Rule of thumb, since you never know, is you might as well take the compassion route. So we'll be talking more about that. The other thing is whatever role a kid is in a dynamic, if a kid is on the side of like doing something hurtful to other kids or unfair, if a kid is on the side of being targeted for some of that, if a kid is a bystander, whatever role a kid is in, all they are is a kid trying to figure out how the world works. What happens if I do this? How does it work if I do that? What's going to happen when this happens? That's all they're trying to figure out. It's your job as parents to help them learn about that. I always say that parents and teachers are shift workers on the same job. So at school, the school's working really hard and the teachers are working really hard to teach them about those things and about reciprocity and about how the world works and what happens when you treat each other that way. And at home, you need to be working on that too. So tonight, what I want to do is offer you some attitudes and practices. So to support your kid to be the kind of human being you want them to be in the world, confident, caring, compassionate, and having integrity and social courage. I assume that's what y'all want here. It wouldn't be in a program like this. So first of all, the goal, here's some attitudes. The goal is not to create a hothouse for your kids, to be sure that your kid, nobody ever hurts their feelings, they never get disappointed. I'll be talking about disappointment a little bit. And the reason why we don't create a hothouse, and you know, lots of times parents will call school and say, my kid said they cried, or my kid said so-and-so wouldn't play with them today. Like the school should do something about that. You actually don't want to do something about that because your kid is missing a chance to go through something and come out the other end. All of the latest studies in neuroscience are showing that some short-term stress actually is necessary for brain development. And this is a really important thing to keep in mind because when we try to, smooth the path and prepare the path for the kid instead of preparing the kid for the path, our kids don't get the good kind of stress. Like many things, stress it's like cholesterol, good stress and bad stress. Short-term stress that provides a kind of arousal that gets your kid activated and then gets resolved, they get supported to have it resolved, is actually good. It's when it's chronic or long-term, it doesn't get resolved, there aren't grown-ups there to help them pull through it, then they start releasing cortisol, not so good. So the art of parenting is finding that place where we allow our kids to feel enough of that arousal without interfering, and yet we're there for them so that it's not prolonged or unresolved. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing I want you to keep in mind is that popularity and friendship are not the same thing. Popularity is highly overrated. It is not a predictor of future well-being. Research is showing us that too. I'm so happy that there's all this great research now, and much of it has been longitudinal, so it's taken a long time to have it come together. But I'm excited about it because this is stuff I've seen over the years, and I love that it's been quantified. So popularity is not a predictor of well-being and success, but having 2 or 3 good friends is. Even one good friend. So when people ask me, my kid doesn't seem to be having any friends, should I be worried? A year while they're trying to figure that out, I don't worry about. More than a year without at least one friend in there, I want to get them some support. They have a couple of good friends, they're right on track. The medium is also the message, like how we cope with what goes on in our kids' lives and the messages we give them, the ones we intend to give and we don't intend to give about themselves and how the world works, is what they carry with them. So, for example, at home, let's say you're in the kitchen doing something, and before you know it, one of your kids is screaming, the other one's yelling, somebody's crying, and you go running out there, and it's, okay, what happened? And then one kid said, well, he did this and this, and then the other kid said, no, she did this and this, and then you did that. Well, wait a minute, who did it first? And you spent a long time trying to figure out what happened. So that whodunit investigation gives your kid the message that what happened is what really matters. And actually, how people treat each other is what matters. So to be able to say, look, you did something that ended up making this kid unhappy, and you did something that ended up making this kid unhappy. And whether you meant to do it or not, that's what happened. And if you're in a place where you want to work this out, then let's find a way to do that. If you're not in that place, then why don't you play separately until you are. But that how people treat each other is what matters, not what happened. Now that parent that goes out and does the whodunit and the kangaroo court and all that, they don't mean to give the message that how people treat each other isn't what matters. It's just the kid's takeaway because the focus is on the what instead of the how. So similarly, if you say to your kid, would you take these groceries in for me? Okay. Well, the good news is the cooperation. And the lack of grace is a bit of a problem. Now, you could be used to that because your kids do that and you're just so glad they're getting off the couch and helping you with the groceries. But that's not going to fly in the world. And because kids think that parents are rational, if it flies with you, they expect it to fly in other places. Yesterday I was working with a family, and this little boy has 2 older siblings and 2 parents, and he's 7, and he is very disruptive and provocative with a bunch of goofy stuff he does persistently, drives his sibs crazy. And they go to the parents about it, and the parents don't do anything because they say, he keeps making a funny face at me. He keeps saying this thing. He keeps doing this. Well, the parents find it charming, but the sibs don't. Apparently, his classmates don't, and the teacher doesn't either. But the parents really do get a kick out of this kid, genuinely. So the kid is looking at their parents and thinking, they're the most important influence in my life. They're smart people, and they think this is funny. There must be something wrong with the other people. I'll keep persisting until they get it too. It's not working well. And once the parents began to understand, oh, wait a minute, we're charmed in a kind of idiosyncratic way, and we can understand where it's annoying to siblings and where it's inappropriate in school. And maybe we need to look at, I said, he's now knows very well how to be charming in this particular way with you. Maybe he could learn something else now. So shifting gears. So again, parents had no intention to set their kid up to have so much difficulty, but they did. So we have to pay attention to that. Basically, it's my feeling that human beings are hardwired for goodness. That's been my experience, honestly. And in the work I do, I've seen so much stuff that's hard. I've seen so many upsetting things happen. And I still believe that human beings are hardwired for goodness. And some people need help, some people need to be understood. But if you start from that position about your kids and about whoever they're interacting with, they're going to be more hopeful about what's possible. So I also want to tell you parents, and particularly you with kids who are older that are heading into middle school or already in middle school, in spite of how all about their friends your kids are, no matter how much media they're exposed to, no matter how full of their own ideas they are, it is still true that you have more influence on them as parents than anybody else. And so that is a big responsibility. And your kids' sense of themselves and what it means to be social is something you give them messages about every single day. So how do you do that? One way is that the image you hold of who you want your kids to be socially and the level of acceptance you have for who they actually are has a lot to do with how they think of themselves. How you respond to the ups and downs that go on between your kid and other kids help form their attitudes about what it means to have an ups and downs with friends. The way you frame your kid's role in social interactions, when things go well or when there's trouble, for example, are they a victim or a villain? By the way, there are no such things as victim or villains. They're just dynamics, honestly. And anybody with more than one kid knows this, that who might look like the villain was probably provoked in some way, who looks like the victim made some choices. So it's not so clear-cut as that. And you don't want to fix your kids in roles around that. So the confidence that you demonstrate in their ability to deal with their own relationships has everything to do with their self-esteem and their image of being effective with people. And also how visible your fundamental human values are when issues come up. So with that in mind, I want to give you some actual practical tips on stuff to do, okay? My point this evening is to give you information that you go home and use. And if I fall short of that, then raise your hand because I'm going to allow for a big QA time so we can pay attention to that. Okay, the two most important things that kids need to understand about themselves to have self-esteem and a positive self-image, and those of you who heard me last spring heard this then, because I say it wherever I go, is there's two things kids need to know to feel good about themselves. One is that they're special and unique and there's no one else like them. The other is that they're just like everybody else. The art of parenting is to know in which moment to give which message. So when your kid comes home and says, I have a big nose and I hate it, it's not the moment to say you're special and unique and there's no one else. It's the moment to say, you know, you're just like everybody, we all have noses and we all have body parts we aren't as fond of. You need to also keep in mind in the way you're monitoring and dealing with things that true self-esteem, what I call true self-esteem, is a two-way street. Anybody can put themselves aside and have regard for others. Anybody can forget about others and just operate with self-interest and self-regard. But true self-esteem means having regard for myself and you in the same moment that we're interacting. Holding myself and holding you as we interact. That's true self-esteem. So you want to take inventory when your kid is saying, I stuck up for myself, I did this and made 3 people feel bad. That isn't self-esteem. That's called full of yourself, which is different than self-esteem. So, and home is the training ground for being in the world. So you are the prototype for others. And So encouraging a respectful, empathic, self-respecting, courteous relationship with you sets the tone for their peer relationships. I have seen so many parents who don't understand that. So I'll have a parent whose toddler does a lot of this kind of stuff and pulls at them and pokes at them, and the parent thinks, oh, well, it's just a little kid. You know, my body, they used to be in my body. This is just what happens. And then those kids go out and hit and poke and do that to other kids. And the parent says, well, I don't want them to do it to kids. But you haven't taught them to respect boundaries and your body. You aren't stopping to think, how will this play out there? How will this play with others? Now, there might be moments where there's things you do that are because you're intimate or you're a family, and you say, you know, we do this here, but this won't play well with others. Or you can do this with someone you know, or someone in your family, or this is just between us. So it's important to be mindful of that. You are also a constant role model for how relationships work. So how you manage your kids' social dynamics, even behind the scenes, is inspiring strategies for them. For example, I can't tell you how many times there's some brouhaha at a school because there's some dynamics between kids in a certain class. So let's say a third grade class, let's say it's the girls, third or fourth grade girls, kind of typical, big dynamics going on. And there's a feeling that this girl won't let other kids be friends with that girl, and then that girl feels bad, and there's a whole dynamic, and people are using each other as kind of weapons to not let that other kid have those friends. So meanwhile, parents are upset about this, and they're upset about the parent of the kid doing it because they're not doing enough. So pretty soon they're writing emails, don't be friends with her, her kid is doing this, and so pretty soon there's a whole scene going on behind the back instead of dealing directly, which is exactly paralleling what the kids are doing. And that's where the kids learned it. So really what you want to do is to ask yourself, something's happened, I have concerns about this, I have inclinations of how I'm going to deal with this, but would I be proud to have my kid know that? I handle things this way. Would I want my kid to handle things this way? And if you're like me, the things I do that are like that, I do them like that because I don't know what else to do. Or I'm feeling powerless and I want to have some power. So get some help. Talk to somebody. Find out how else you can do it. Because that's another thing you want to model for your kids is when you don't know, you find out from somebody who does to help you. By the way, when I talk about you being a role model for how relationships work, there is those of you that are in two-parent families, there is a peer relationship between you two parents that your kids are watching. Little eyes are watching, little ears are listening all the time. So you're modeling how do you resolve a conflict, how do you treat each other, how do you treat somebody when they've made a mistake? All of these things, they're watching, they're absorbing, and they're playing it out on the playground. You want to welcome feedback about your kids socially. I get a lot of parents arguing with me about this, believe it or not, but you are never with your children when they are without a parent. You wonder how parents could argue with me about it. They say, I watch from across the yard, or I look in the window. You know, your kids can smell that you're there, and it becomes different. But teachers have this front row seat to who your kids are in a social milieu day in and day out when they are in that smorgasbord of opportunity for different ways of being. And it's great to find that out. Sometimes you're like amazed, and sometimes you're kind of disappointed. But it's good to get a gauge to see what you need to be working on and exposing your kids to. It's also really important when your kids come home and talk to you about something that happened in school, lots of times they come home, and boy, this happened to me a lot. My kids would come home and tell me about something that happened. It was either it just got me so upset or so triggered, or actually it was kind of, the gossip was kind of juicy, or there was a lot of drama, that I would get caught up in what happened. Oh, and then what did he say? And then what happened when he said it? And then what did the teacher do? And then what did that happen? And I was so caught up in that. So here my kid comes to me and says, this really upsetting thing happened, and I'm all focused on the other people, not on my kid. So I'm more into what the plot is and who got away with something than I am with how was that for you. So my kid gets one of those inadvertent messages then, that I'm more interested in all that than I am in them. I can't tell you how many times kids come to parents and open up about something, and rather than asking that kid about their heart, about what's happening for them, they get caught up in the plot. So pay attention to that. Also recognize your own issues. When your buttons get pushed, when your own needs get triggered by all of this. I see kids who are involved in a sports team that's not really working for them, but it really works for the parents because they have a social thing going on. So being able to listen and hear about that. Another example of buttons getting pushed, when I was a kid, maybe in 3rd grade or so, I came home and told my mom about a big fight I had with Barbara Ratner. I came home and said Barbara Ratner was really mean to me, and she did this and she did that. My mom was, oh my God, she did this to you. She didn't get caught up in Barbara Ratner. She got caught up in defending me. She did that to you. How could that have happened? Nobody should do that to you, and that's terrible. And it was very gratifying. She totally took my side. It was all about it. She was all revved up. She was so revved up. It was so satisfying. I actually remember that night. I remember where we were. 2 days later, I came home and I said, Mom, could Barbara Ratner come over and play? My mom said, Barbara Ratner? No, she can't come over and play. She was mean. I was so over that. My mom was holding my grudge. And so that thing that felt so good that night turned out to be not such a good thing. It took me a long time to get my mom thawed out so far to that. And it gave me the message not to tell my mom about stuff like that, because then she might, who knew what I might want later. It's actually a little bit of a good training. So let me skip over into something that when I came home, those of you who heard me speak last time, when I came home and told my mom that Barbara Ratner was mean to me and all the things she did, what should my mom have said? Oh. Right? She should have said, oh. And then as I talked about it, she'd say, oh. And when she got really experienced at doing that, she would go, oh, oh. She could vary it a little bit, but then I would have discharged, which is mostly what I need to do, is discharge what happened. And I feel like somebody is there for me. She's right there with her O. And we move on. And then she watches. Then what happens? If I ask her for something, I hope she'll give it to me. If I ask for advice, I hope she'll give it to me. If I ask for some commiseration, I hope she'll give it to me. But if all I'm doing is discharging, the best thing to say is, oh. So you really do have to watch out for the victim-villain thing. On behalf of all the older siblings in your families, they really do not like being blamed for things and being considered the villain in every interaction because they're older and they should know. It's really not fair. And when the kids tell me how not unfair and how oppressive it is, I say to them that actually I'm more worried about your little brother or sister who's the victim. Why are you more worried about them? They're the one that gets the comfort and they don't get in trouble. I said, I know, but walking around in life feeling like a victim and feeling so disempowered, you're being given extra power, and sooner or later you'll figure out that you don't really deserve that extra power. But it's hard when you're not given enough credit or empowerment to gain it. So I worry about, so I say you're kind of coming out ahead, but the deal is there are no victims and villains. There are just dynamics. And if you want to challenge me on that when we do questions, I am right there for that. You also want to support your kids to look for the good in people and situations. For some reason, when we hear a story about something that didn't go well, and this guy, he hit me, and then I told him to stop, and he hit me again, and then the teacher came, and then the teacher told him to stop, and then this other kid put ice on where he hit me, and then the teacher told him that, and then the teacher didn't do anything. He didn't get in trouble. He didn't get in trouble, the teacher didn't, and you're all focused on that. And you're not focused, how nice that another kid came and got you ice. How good that there was somebody out there to help you. And for bonus points, benefit of the doubt, sometimes teachers have their way of working on things with kids that aren't so obvious to the other kids. I'll bet you teachers are working on trying to find a fair way to deal with this, even though you might not be able to see that right then. Think about the messages we give our kids, and do we focus on the good stuff that's there? By the way, if you can feel good about the world that you're in and have heart for others, and be able to stand things that are difficult, life goes well for you. That's what you want to support in your kids, not a hothouse where they have to be in this little confined place to feel okay. You want to teach kids about impact and intentions. This is a really important thing. I actually learned about this from little kids in my office. It's the most interesting thing to me. Is some kid is walking past another kid who's building with Legos or Lincoln Logs or something, and they knock the thing over. And the other kid starts to cry because their thing got collapsed. And the parent says to the kid that knocked it over, hey, you knocked your sister's thing over, what do you say? And the other kid said, well, I didn't do it on purpose. So they didn't have to say anything. Now, I watched, and it's true, that kid did not do it on purpose. So that kid, first of all, is defensive, that they're being blamed for something when they couldn't help it, they didn't do it on purpose. And second of all, see absolutely no role for themselves since they didn't do it on purpose. And I actually had this same experience at home with my two kids, where one kid was running around the house, which she shouldn't have been doing, but she was doing it. Another kid came down the stairs and walked right in front of her when she was coming, and she didn't see it happen, knocked the little one down. The little one started to cry, and the runner kept running. I said, hey, go back there. She got hurt. Well, I didn't do it, it wasn't my fault. She said, it wasn't my fault. Said, well, that doesn't matter. She got hurt. Go back. She said, why if it wasn't my fault? It was one of those moments where, because she asked why, I had to really stop. I didn't have that on the tip of my tongue, why. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, and here's what I got to. And I've been staying with it. There is a difference between intention and impact. No matter what my intention is, I may have an impact. So I might say to you, you look nice today. And you might say to me, are you saying I look ugly the last time you saw me? I did not mean to imply that. I actually say that's a nice jacket, you look nice in it. But you ended up somehow insulting me. Am I responsible for the effect it had on you? Yeah, it was my words. I had an impact. So my job is to say, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. I didn't mean to say that. your job is to accept that my intentions were different than the impact, and to relate to me based on my intention, not on what happened to me. So if I, on purpose, knock somebody down, then relate to me like I aggressed on you. If I accidentally knock you down, relate to me like somebody who hadn't meant that. So what I always tell kids is I say, if I'm on BART and it stops suddenly, and somebody loses their balance, starts to fall and knocks into somebody who knocks into me, and I knock into somebody and they fall. That was so not my fault. It was so not my fault. The guy that hit me, but it wasn't his fault, and that guy, but it's all more their fault than my fault. It's so not my fault. And I still will what I do. And every kid I say that to says, you would say, sorry, are you okay, and help them. I said, that's right. And that's what we do when we have an impact on somebody, whether we intend it or not. But it is also important for the person that's being impacted to hear the intention of the other person and to have regard for that. Back to the two-way street. Does that make sense? So, speaking of that, you want to aim for apologies that matter. How many of you have kids that just don't want to say, I'm sorry? They don't like the sorry word. How many of you are married to people like that? No, kids need to know that we all get grumpy and inconsiderate sometimes. We lose control of our tempers, we make mistakes, and end up upsetting or hurting another person, on purpose or not. So we all are in a position, one reason or another, to apologize and let other people know that, one, I realize what happened. I see that I knocked you down. That must hurt. You might need some help to get up. I understand how you feel, right? I care enough to say, I'm going to hold on here so that doesn't happen again if we stop suddenly. And I'm going to figure out a way to make it right. In this case, help them up. If you let someone know, I see the impact I had on you. I care about that. I get how that must be for you. I want to make it right or help you or bring it back to where it was. That matters so much more than sorry. So much more than sorry. I used to push for sorry. And when I was pushing for sorry, I had an incident once. I was driving a carpool, and there was a sick kid, so I had to run in and get some homework, and the kids were in the car in the school parking lot, and there was one of my kids and a kid 2 years older than her. So they were maybe she was 6 and he was 8. So I come back in the car and she's crying hysterically. What's the matter? What's going on? What happened? She said, Sebastian asked me if I like spiders, and I said I don't like spiders. And then he dangled a dead spider right in front of me. And he knew I didn't like it, and he dangled it in front of me anyway. And I turned to Sebastian. I said, Sebastian, you need to say something. What do you need to say? You need to say something. He turned to her and said, sorry. And she said, sorry doesn't do anything. And he said, either do dead spiders. So I thought, I had just facilitated and utterly useless. Nothing meaningful happened in that exchange. So that got me thinking what would be meaningful. And it would have been meaningful if he had been able to say, I see that really upset you. I didn't mean for you to get that upset. I thought it would be funny. Here, what can I do to make it up to you? That would have been meaningful. And grudge holders would have a hard time holding a grudge about that. Probably should have had Barbara Ratner talk to my mom. So, and if you think about it, that's true for all of us in this room. We would rather feel seen and regarded and tended to than just hear that word. So that word's great if it's accompanied by the rest, but not if it's just like a dead spider. So the other thing you want to do is give kids the concept, okay? So I was once working at a school. I was working with a school who gave me a call and asked me to see this family because a terrible thing happened. What happened? So this 2 second-grade kids, well, there was a second-grade kid who pushed another kid down on the ground and was kicking him. My kid, David, was watching and laughing. So eventually a teacher came over, tended to the hurt kid, tended to the kicking kid, and then they got to my kid and said, "Why were you laughing?" He was kind of the bystander kid, right? Why were you laughing? And he said, "It's funny." They said, "It's not funny." He said, "It was funny." "No, it wasn't funny." "Yeah, it was funny." So that teacher said, "We have to send you to the head." So he goes to the head, and the head said, "Why were you laughing?" "Because it was funny." "That wasn't funny." "Yes, it was funny." So that didn't go anywhere. They called his parents. His parents said, "Why would you laugh?" He said, "Because it's funny." It's not funny. So then the head said, "You got to go see a therapist." So the family came to see me and told me the story once again in my office. And this kid was really lucky because just the night before I'd seen some movie on TV where somebody stepped on something that knocked the guy in the head and they fell down. And also I was one of those kids where if somebody pulled a chair out from somebody and they fell on their tushy, I did see the humor in that. So when he said it was funny, I said, "Oh, I could see where that might have been funny." He was so relieved. Finally, a voice of reason. So I said I could see where it's funny. Parents are horrified. And I said, but what was the other kid doing that was on the ground being kicked? And he said, "Well, he was crying." I said, "Okay, so it was funny. And why do you think he was crying?" "Oh, it probably hurt," he said. "Okay, so it was funny and someone was being hurt. If someone is being hurt at the same time that it's funny, which thing matters the most?" Kid looked at me blank. He didn't know. So I turned to the parents, I said, "Which thing matters most?" Dad said, "It always matters most if that somebody's being hurt. That's always the thing you have to think of first, and that should always be the thing that makes you decide what to do." And the kid said, "Oh." He honestly hadn't put that together for himself, and he wasn't one of those kids that kind of picked that up, highly empathic kids that kind of picked that up along the way, or even a little empathic kids that picked that up along the way. So you want to give your kids the concept. You want to be able to break it down and explain to them how it works, because that's what they're trying to figure out. I want you to know that hard times for kids always have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They kind of move through it pretty quickly. For some reason, we grown-ups tend to get in there and want to prolong that middle part. We make a bigger deal out of something. We make a moment into an event. We make too much comfort when they just needed to be told, "You'll be okay." "I know you'll be okay. Remember last time that happened? You'll be okay." We give kids, a kid does something wrong. We say, "I told you that you need to tell me the truth when you do that. Remember the other time you lied and the other time you lied?" I mean, we have a rap sheet with our kids. It was an incident. It's not a defining incident unless you have huge trends. It's just a moment. Deal with the moment. When your kids mess up, help them make it right. It's so empowering to walk around in the world knowing that you can make something right. If you get a note home from school or you hear from a parent on a play date that your kid did something that was out of bounds, first thing you want to do is have a talk with your kids so you're sure they understand what happened, give them the concepts, get clear on their intentions, help them understand the impact, and then say, "Let's talk about what you can do that might help make it right with your friend." Teach your kids the difference between tattling and reporting. we want our kids to report. If somebody is dangerously climbing up on the roof, you want your kids to come tell you somebody's in danger. If someone else is in danger, if they feel in danger, if somebody's drawing all over my walls, I want to hear about that too. So if property's in danger, let a parent or a grown-up know. And any kind of hurt, emotional hurt, if there's information that a grown-up needs to know, that's called a report. Tattling, the motivation is to be sure that a grown-up knows so they can tend to it. Tattling, the motivation is to get somebody in trouble so you can look better or because it's entertaining or gratifying to get them in trouble. And it's a very obvious thing. And if it's not obvious, you can ask a kid, why are you telling me that? And they say, so you can get them in trouble. They always tell you that. They're right out there with it. You want to teach your kids, and you want to show your kids by how you respond that you're interested in reports and not interested in telling. Inclusion cannot be legislated. It has to be inspired. And what I mean by that is you want to inspire kids who exclude to consider including and consider the value of that. The goodness, the humanity, the possibilities that it might be a good and interesting thing to do. And you want to help excluded kids learn how to inspire themselves getting included. That, nudging and annoying and intruding isn't likely to get people to want to include you, but what would? So to help them with that. And kids need to learn if they are going to exclude. If two kids are playing and they've been building something most of a recess time, or two budding teens are having a private conversation or doing something themselves, and someone comes over and wants to join them, and they really, it's not appropriate for what they're doing to include them. Exclude with grace. With grace say, actually we're in the middle of something that we'd like to finish, but maybe we could do something another time. Find a gracious and humane and considerate way to not include. And you also want kids who are not being included to accept no with grace and rapport. And you want your kids to help others do the same. If your kid has learned that kind of grace and their friend isn't, to say, hey, come on, let's just do it this way. Or, hey, maybe they'll let us play another time. Let's just go do something else. You want to help kids manage disappointment. How many of you have kids that struggle with handling disappointment? Yeah, there's an epidemic. How many of you have a little bit of trouble with disappointment?
Yeah.
It's hard. So my spiel on this is, I do believe that human beings are born with a disappointment muscle, and that muscle needs to be exercised in order to be useful to us, and that most of the time parents have a reflex to interfere with kids getting to exercise that muscle. If you anticipate that your kid is going to be disappointed, you run interference so they won't be, and they miss a chance to exercise that muscle. So welcome your kids having to handle some disappointments. Don't turn it into an event. Know that it's a passing moment. Show them you have confidence that they can get past that and move on. Do not let them win games so they don't have to be disappointed about losing. Do not avoid the ice cream store so you won't have to say no. Let them have a chance to experience it. The more they experience it with their parents who love them the most in the world, the easier it's going to be to handle it when it happens socially. I want to say something about your kids' heartbreak. You can't engineer their relationships or the feelings of other people, but you have a lot of access and influence on the meaning your kids make. of those experiences. So your kids are constantly absorbing your attitudes and the way you think about things. So let me give you an idea of some things you want to be sure to let your kids know. One is that while some things that happen socially are out of our control, we just have to exercise our disappointment muscle and accept it, there are usually ways we can and do influence relationships. And you can help your kids learn to focus on those ways. Friendships ebb and flow. This is something that sometimes it takes a long time to learn, but let your kids know that friendships ebb and flow. And in the course of any relationship, there's times when you're closer and times when you're more distant. And that's typical, and it's true all throughout your school years. I feel like I can talk about this, actually I can talk about this whole subject with some authority. I'm still friends with kids from kindergarten and from middle school and from high school and from college, and I watch those ebbs and flows, and I know that with some determination you can sustain relationships, but even with the closest of ones, there's ebbs and flows. And relationships can be resilient. So friends and siblings can recover from problems and disagreements and pick up where they left off. So it's not the end of the world that there's a rift. And those can just be moments and not, again, define the whole relationship. Now, that being said, some relationships do run their course. Some relationships actually have a shelf life. And sometimes they're just kind of up. You've moved on. And change is just the way things are sometimes. Change is just how it is. The other thing is, kids are often drawn to and appreciate and feel validated by similarities with other people. I think we all do to a certain extent. But it is equally sweet to discover and appreciate differences and to help your kids make room for those differences. So I guess the last thing I want to say is, believe it or not, there is value in every single interaction your kids have. Whether they're the kind of interaction you would choose or not, whether it was a happy one or a sad or difficult one. And it's again, you can't control what happens, and you don't even want to try it because you don't want to go for that hot house. But you have tremendous influence in the meaning they make of it. So let me help you with that now. Any questions? Yes?
Earlier you were talking about the older-younger sibling relationship and how older siblings can feel lonely. So how do you handle when your child has that perception, even though it's not true? You know, that you're both the kids are getting in trouble as often as the other, and they both believe that they're always to blame for everything that's going on.
Okay, so this is a great question. I want to be sure everybody heard, which is this victim-villain thing and the older sibling feeling blamed all the time. This mom wants to know, how do you handle it when you really aren't blaming the older kid all the time? You pretty much feel like you're even-handed about who gets in trouble, but the older one keeps characterizing it as if you always do that. So what if you use the impact and intention principle here? What might you say to your kid?
I mean, usually my explanation is, I know that you believe I do, but that's simply not the case. When I felt your brother doing the same thing, this is the same repercussion.
Okay, so if you say to your kid, I know you believe I do that, but it's really not the case. I deal with your brother equally. If that were effective, it would have worked and you wouldn't hear it again. One way you know that something you're doing isn't working is it keeps happening. So one rule of thumb is don't keep doing something that doesn't work. The minute you realize it doesn't work, do something else. I don't know why human beings have the nature that we keep doing things and You know, we are the only species that does that. Every other species, the minute they determine that something isn't working, they stop doing it and change gears. We are the only ones that keep thinking, maybe this time will work, with zero reinforcement. It's like the funniest thing. Anyway, here's the problem with what you're saying, is you say, I know you believe that, but you're wrong. Here's what's really true. And your kid doesn't feel like he's wrong. So what you want to say is, oh, sweetheart, I am so sorry if it feels that way to you. I must be handling it in some way that's leaving you with the feeling. Because the fact is, I know that sometimes I'm upset with something you do, sometimes I'm upset with something your brother does. And my intention is to just be as even-handed about that as I can be. And I honestly don't experience you as somebody who does more wrong things or bad things or anything like that. And I'm so sorry if I've made you feel that way, that I feel differently than that. I must be doing something. And the next time you feel unfairly that something's happening, I hope you'll let me know.
Here's that.
Okay, so one of the things that is probably happening is you are having a right and wrong between one or the other. You think, well, it's equal time. But you see, what you're saying is, he's a victim some of the times, he's a villain some of the times, the other's a villain, and that's a losing proposition. So I would stop doing that, since it's not getting anybody anywhere, and they're not focusing on the thing that matters. So if one of them screams and says the other one pinched me, but he called me a name and all of this, all that matters to me is that they're not getting along. That you guys seem to be having a problem handling yourselves right now. I can't wait till the day happens when you say, you know, I'd like to play on my own and just do that instead of pick a fight. But right now that seems to be your way of telling me that you need me to come in and separate you. So I'm going to do that. And when they don't want that to happen, they'll stop doing that. And who started it or how it happened, it doesn't matter. And let me just say something about why this is so important. I was once called on an emergency by a school that could I come work with their faculty. A horrible, horrible thing happened. What was the horrible thing? Well, this third grade kid, a first grader walked past the third grader, and the third grader beat the first grader up pretty badly. And as if that wasn't a bad enough thing, it happened 2 more times. Same first grader had gotten hurt 3 times. They were quite concerned that this third grader was like a serial killer in the making, and that there was something serious. They were talking psychopathy and all this serious thing, and they needed a mental health professional out there. So they had me go, the whole faculty is there, they're waiting to hear me about the kid, and I said, you know, I want to let you know that I want to start by talking about this first grader who I'm the most concerned about. What? Why are you more concerned about the first grader? I said, because what kid would walk past somebody who beat them up like that 2 more times? Everybody got quiet. They hadn't been thinking about that. Somebody that's got a drive to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, whatever this older kid had going on, I'm not saying that's not a problem and not an issue, but this school was prepared to ignore and only see this kid as a victim. It's a dangerous thing to get caught up in villains and victims. What I want to say about the big kid is he is got some aggression going on and is not self-regulated, doesn't have self-control, and is unsafe. And what I want to say about the little one is that there is something about boundaries or judgment or some drive to get hurt or something going on with that kid. I see lots of kids that they don't make trouble, but they're often in the wrong place at the wrong time. So they either get pulled into the trouble because they were standing there, either by getting hurt themselves or being blamed. And so you want to learn how to stay out of that. So it's just pointless to deal with victims and villains. You want to deal with your kids and what they're doing. In this case, you have two kids doing something. They're making a ruckus when you don't want a ruckus. So try getting rid of victim. I would tell your kid, you know what? I haven't been handling this in the best way. No wonder you feel that way. From now on, I want to let you know that all I care about is that you guys make difficulties or you don't, that you can get along or you don't. And when you can play together and we'll help you make that possible. And when you can't, we'll have you play separately because there's a need for that right then. And I think you'll find a huge change. Okay? Yeah. About what? Oh, only children. So the one thing going on with only children is they don't have a chance to practice reciprocity that much. There's a little bit of it, but not too much. Because if a parent is playing Legos or hanging out with an older kid, you're going to defer to that old, I mean, even if you're with your teenager and you're going out and doing errands and you say, hey, how about we go get some Mexican food? And they say, no, I really want pizza. You're going to say, okay, let's go get pizza. We just do that with our kids. So, but if they're with their friend says, no, I want to get Mexican. You know what? They don't learn the give and take. So when you're a parent with an only kid, there's a few things that I think are important because that is an important part of development. And it's not built into the family. So one thing you can do is build it into the family. If you're playing Legos with a little kid, well, how old's your kid? 7. Okay, 7. You're playing Legos and your kid takes all the wheels. You go, okay, I'll make a boat. Then your kid starts taking all those parts because they need it for something. Okay, I'll make a helicopter. Oh, now they need to have all the wings and blades. After a while, I want you to turn to your kid and say, you know, if you keep taking all the good parts, it's not going to be fun to play with you. I'm going to go do something else. So that they understand the result of treating somebody that way. A parent is inclined to say, okay, I'll just watch you make something wonderful. But your kid isn't getting a chance to learn reciprocity and give and take. So one is bring it home by being sure there's some opportunities and that you are asking of that more because there isn't another kid that's doing that. And the other is to be sure your kid has play dates and social opportunities that are repeated, like every Thursday you play with this friend. So there's some routine so they get that kind of pattern going, that familial kind of pattern with each other, that they aren't always on their best new guest behavior, but they're on the you're familiar, and so I can let my guard down and I'll try my stuff on you. Oh, that's what happens. So they can learn some of that. Okay? Yes?
You were talking about the difference earlier between being popular versus having friendships. And it occurred to me that you probably have a much more precise definition and understanding of popularity than I do. And I would love to know, I want your understanding of it. Can you talk about what that, unpack that term for us a little bit?
Popularity is that people have an idea about you. And they want to be around you because of the idea they have about you. The idea might be that other people that they value you, or big numbers of people value you and they want to be in the group that values you. That's popularity. Or you have something I envy and I want it. So if I'm near you, it might rub off on me. So that makes for popularity. I have known popular kids that are so clueless that they are popular and have no idea why they're popular and don't know what to do with these people. But it's just because they're handsome or athletic or just somehow have some kind of charisma, but it's not on purpose and they don't even know what's going on. But that is different from true friendship. True friendship is there is caring, I'm there for you if you're down and out. There's curiosity, I want to learn about you, I want to know you. There's reciprocity, it's not a one-way street. That's real friendship.
So what I'm hearing you say is you could be popular without actually having a relationship with a single person. So
You can be popular and have not a single friend. And it is confusing later as those kinds of things start wearing off and you're alone. Or you're looking for more depth and that isn't the thing that's happening. So think in a way that a popular person has fans and somebody with real relationship has friends. You know, I want to say something about, because I do every time I talk to people about being on your spot, what your spot is. I always talk to parents about being on their spot, find your spot when you're dealing with your kids. And one of the reasons why it's important in this topic is that if you can find your spot, you can help your kids find their spot. Let me tell you what your spot is. Your spot is that place you come from, where from head to toe you have clarity and a sense of where you stand or what matters. So your head, all your judgment and thinking about it says, this is how I think about it. But then you also have the heart for what you're saying. You have the gut instinct that this is right. And your feet are ready to stand firm or walk your talk. So an idea might be, I had a parent say to me one evening that her 10-year-old had been asking her for a cell phone. And she was very clear. Her older girl got it at 13, and this kid was going to get it at 13, and she was very clear and on her spot about that. But something was going wrong because, by the way, when you're on your spot, your communication is very clear. But something was going wrong because the kid kept nagging her about the cell phone. And the mom said, I was so clear on it. I said, well, let's do the inventory. In your head, is this good judgment to wait to, yes, I really think kids shouldn't have smartphones till they're 13. It's worked for my older daughter. I really feel that way. I really think about it that way. I've read a lot of research. I'm firm. My head is firm on this. I said, now let's go to your heart. Do you have the heart to have your kid wait for a cell phone? She burst into tears. Right in front of a group of 150 people. And I said, what's going on? She said, you know, my older kid, everything comes easy to her. And it was fine making her wait for that. My 10-year-old has learning issues, and everything has been really hard for her. And I know this is something she really wants, and it would make some social things and some other things easier. And I think that's where I'm stuck, because my instincts are that she shouldn't have one yet. And I've obviously been standing firm, but my heart hasn't been in it. And I said, that's why your kid keeps asking. She found an opening in just the most tender of places. So she said, how do I get my heart in it? And I said, let's talk about it a little more. And she found the heart to say no. So when you are on your spot, my best example of this always is, why don't we run through it again? Some of you have been through this. How many of you have trouble getting your kids out the door in the morning? Raise your hand. How many of you have trouble getting your kids to bed at night? Raise your hand. How many of you have trouble with meal times, getting people to behave, eat stuff, go to the table? Raise your hands. How many of you have trouble with the way people talk to each other, treat each other in the household? Raise your hands. How many of you have trouble getting your kids to buckle in? Anybody notice anything? Anybody? Notice anything?
We're communicating very clearly about the buckling in.
By and large, you're all communicating clearly about the buckling in, probably because you're clear from head to toe, right? Okay, so let me tell you a story about when you are on your spot, you can support your kid to be on her spot. So I'll tell you a story. A little third grade girl was in my practice and said to me, her family was seeing me, and the mom said, talk to Sheri about the problem they're having. So the kid said that her name was Jenna, and she had a best friend named Sarah. And they had been best friends since nursery school. And Sarah, a new kid named Rachel, joined their class late in the school year. And you know how sometimes new kids are rock stars? So this kid was like a rock star because everybody, oh, fresh blood, they're all excited. So they, so Sarah was gravitated toward Rachel, and Rachel was interested in being friends with Sarah. Once they became friends, Rachel said, I don't want you to be friends with Jenna anymore. If you're going to be my friend, you can't be her friend. Jenna was, Rachel had Sarah so caught up in her that Jenna actually came to, Sarah came to Jenna, my girl, and said, I'm not going to be friends with you anymore. Rachel wants me to be just her friend, and I'm not going to be your friend anymore. Since preschool, they've been close. Jenna's devastated. Jenna goes home and tells her mom, who tries very hard to say, oh, but then thinks, I'm saying oh to you, but I'm going to be calling Sarah's mom. I'm so going to be calling Sarah's mom. Talking about this. And then her husband said, no, you're so going to be talking to Sheri about this. They came in, the mom had the kid raise it with me, and the mom said, should I be calling her mom? I said, no. And I said, you need to stay on your spot, and we need to help Jenna find her spot. So I said, Jenna, how do you feel about Sarah? She said, Sarah's my friend. I love her. I've loved her since preschool. And I said, how do you feel? She said, I'm sad. It hurts me. And I said, so you're sure you love her? Yes. Are you sure you're sad and it hurts you? Yes. I said, then that's your truth. That's where you are. So she said, what should I say to her? I said, tell her your truth. And my thought was, by just saying, this is where I am, she would just stay on her spot, find her own kind of social courage, and that would in some way at least give her her own dignity, you know? That was what I was hoping. She goes to school, and she finds Sarah, and she says, I want you to know that I understand you don't want to be my friend anymore, but you don't want me to be your friend anymore, but you will always be my friend. I will always love you. And she took it further. She said, I will always love you. I've loved you since preschool, and I will always love you, and you will always be my friend, and I'm really sad that you don't want me to be yours. And she turned to walk away because she had said her piece. And Sarah burst into tears, wrapped her arms around her, and said, I'm always going to be your friend. And she went to Rachel and said, you need to let Jenna be friends with us too, or I can't be your friend. I'm happy for us all to be friends, but she said, I'm glad to be your friend, but I'm not changing this friendship. It was, I just didn't think it would turn out that well. but it did, and that is being on your spot. And even if it hadn't, you know, Jenna said, when I turned away, I felt better. When I walked away, I felt better. And then I got there, got relief. She said, I hit the jackpot. Okay, any other, yes?
Well, you brought up cell phones, and I know a lot of the crowd probably has younger children, but it comes really fast. And there's a whole social world that some children are part of and some children are not part of. Eventually, they're mostly all part of it, but there's a whole dynamic, and it's hard to be on your spot because none of us grew up with that. We don't know what that world is like. Do you have any insight on how to support your children with that?
Yeah, it is hard. We're at the tail end, I think, of analog parents raising digital kids. Pretty soon, everybody will be digital native. But for now, I think the first thing I would say, always, when things come up about screens and technology, lean in, don't pull out. What I mean by lean in is what you don't know about, find out about. If your kid wants a video game a computer game or something that you think is too violent or too something, preview it before you say no. So you can talk with intelligence and credibility about why not. Don't go by rumor or hearsay, and also ask your kid what they like about it. You might be surprised, because it might be a little bit bloody, but what they like is a strategy, and it may or may not be worth it. And if it's not worth it, then you can talk intelligently. The same thing with cell phone. Find out, when kids say everybody is, find out actually how many kids in the class have cell phone. Find out how kids are using it. Find out what people are doing. Find out what your kid wants to do. Under no circumstances should children have privacy on phones, I would say, ever, until they leave home. That's the other thing. There shouldn't be privacy. You should be able to have access to their social media and to that kind of stuff. I think it's important because kids don't always have judgment. They don't get the permanence of these things or the repercussions of them. And you yourself are at risk. That kids give family addresses and stuff. So it's important to stay connected to that. And let your kids know that's the deal. About some kids have it and some kids don't, and what's going to happen. If you are on your spot about your decision, either to give it to a kid and then all the judgmental people who say, how could you let your kid have this at this age? You're on your spot. It made sense to you. Your heart's in it. Your gut says, this is right for my kid. You're willing to do it. Then that's great. If you're saying no and your kid is, I'm the only one. I remember once one of my kids said to me, I'm the only one with a curfew. No one else at Berkeley High has a curfew. I said, I can't believe that. It's true, I'm the only one of all my friends with a curfew. So we happened to be at a gathering and her 4 closest friends were there. I asked the parents, your kid have a curfew? Sure enough, she was the only one with a curfew. And she said, does that change anything? No. But it's interesting. I think it's hecka interesting. But it didn't change my mind. Now, some things might change your mind, but that didn't change my mind. So, find your own spot, but find it by leaning in. Don't stay not knowing. When you say, I don't know, find out.
What is your take on this?
Let me take him and then go.
This is fast. Correct me if I'm wrong, but would you agree that this applies to a 45 or 50-year-old child too? This action.
A 45 or 50-year-old child? This, about boundaries and roles and things like that? Pretty much.
What's your take on social media when you say to lean in? There's so much peer pressure when they get a little older it's very important for them to be in social media. So what's your psychological take on that as far as how it affects the kids?
Most of the time when I find parents be too restrictive, it's because they are uneducated. And educated parents who make a decision to keep their kids off it are not being too restrictive. They've made a solid, from their spot decision. So, is social media a good thing, a not good thing? It depends on how it's used. It depends on the kid's maturity. It depends on the grown-up's access. It depends on your community of kids. What the kids are using and what they're doing. But again, this is something you really need to learn about. You need to ask kids about. I have parents who are saying, no social media, I'm keeping you off, no Snapchat, no Instagram, none of this stuff, we're not doing that. And then a hurtful social dynamic that their kid's involved in happens from group text or a group chat, which was not something that was restricted because it doesn't have all the fanfare of social media sites. And actually in middle schools, lots of times the issue that I'm brought in on happened on a group text rather than on a social media site. So what you really want to do is talk to your kids about your values. You know, what I tell to, when kids were first having their own computers and all this kind of stuff and going online a lot, parents would say to me, you know, how do you manage this? How do you control this? And I said, the same way parents have done it forever. When your kid gets on a screen, you ask the same question that a parent in the 50s asked their kids when they walked out the door. Where are you going? Who are you going with? When are you going to be back? What are you going to do there? Same questions. Where do you go? What do you do? Who else is there? This is what time you gotta close it and be home. And you want to know those things, and you need to just get more involved. And most parents really honestly don't know as much of their kids. And you know, when cell phones were first like really coming, I mean, I've been doing this way before there were cell phones, so I watched that whole thing happen. And my favorite thing was parents not understanding that you no longer can do top-down parenting. It's got to be top-down, bottom-up parenting. Because you can't go to a kid and say, you have to do what I say, I'm older and wiser and I know, and here, will you program my cell phone? You know, most of us are living and parenting our IT service, right? And then we say we're the ones that know and we're the ones, so you need to learn more about it. You might never be as technically savvy, but you should know this stuff and lean in. Yes? I can't hear speak up.
I just want to get your opinion on the decades that you've been working with children. There's a lot of research recently to say that children are really becoming anxious and depressed because they're living fast lives. Like, my daughter's in grade 2 and some of her peers are going to go on competitive soccer lessons. Parents push. I've got friends that put their kids in 5 things and people come home crying, but the mother won't let it go. And I know Tracy just feels that pressure that she wants her daughter to keep up. And so our children are depressed. Is it tough for kids these days that our times changing?
You know, every decade has had some version of the hurried child. For one thing or another, if it was an academic achievement or sports achievement or something. There is a lot more intensity now. There are a lot more fronts that things are happening on. But to me, if someone were to ask me what's the most important thing to give my child, it would not be the capacity to perform above everyone else. If you were to ask me the most important thing to give a kid, it would be a childhood. You have one chance to give your kids a childhood and to let them be kids. And that doesn't necessarily mean holding them back from competitive soccer teams or cell phones or whatever, but it's being mindful that what you do and what you let happen is right-sized and not thinking about ahead. You know, one of my kids came home very upset from a swimming lesson in about 4th or 5th grade because some kid at the swimming lesson told her that grades for college start counting in 4th grade. My daughter went to a school that didn't have grades, so she was very worried about this. And I told her, I started to tell her that they don't start and this is how it works. And I said, you know, that's not how it works. And it's not something you have to even begin to think about for a lot of years. I'll let you know when you need to think about it. Visibly relieved. the inadvertent message, if I had told her how it worked, would have been to get her involved in what it takes to go to college already. I didn't want her to think about it yet. So ask yourselves, what do I want my kid focused on now? What matters? And when I say the how over the what, I would way rather have a kid that was a good sport than a kid who was a star on the team. Because you're going to be a star on that team that year, or maybe in that sport for a while, but how you treat other people is forever. Yes?
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the difference between tattling and reporting. I kind of find out a kindergartner, and I find he's kind of somewhere in the mix of being like, he doesn't want to get anyone in trouble, but it might not be a safety issue, but it's kind of an issue of right and wrong. And he's navigating what that means and what his role is in supporting or for himself or for other friends, like how to navigate right and wrong and what the right behavior is. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about how we maybe would support our younger ones to kind of navigate that space.
So there are a lot of little kids who are very interested in rules and are very rule bound and feel like they need to be the keeper of the rules, because if somebody's breaking a rule and the teacher or the parent isn't noticing or isn't doing something about it, then there won't be the rule, and then there'll be chaos, and then they won't feel safe because they like rules. So when you say you don't have to worry about that, or that's not always the rule, you make them a little anxious, and it doesn't work, and you keep saying it and it keeps not working. You got to remember to not act like a human being and keep doing the same thing that doesn't work, and act like any other creature that said, okay, that didn't work, let me try something else. So what I would say to that kid is, rules are complicated, and even though it is a rule that we don't bounce a ball inside, when that ball fell from that kid's hands and bounced, I let that go, because it wasn't on purpose. So sometimes to explain what happened, other times to say, you know what, I'm watching that that's happening, and you don't have to worry about that. And I know the rule, and I know how to manage that by and large it gets followed. By the way, this also, I might as well talk about fair. The kids will, and particularly siblings, this isn't fair, that's not fair. And then you get a parent saying life isn't fair, which makes the kid who's obsessed with fair feel pretty worried. Life isn't fair. And it's not true, because all of you spend an enormous amount of time trying to be fair to your kids. You're fair in regard to the other kids, you're fair in regard to your own needs, you really work hard to be fair to your kids. So to say that life isn't fair when the people who care for you the most are making a big effort that way, it isn't really fair. So what you want to say to the kid is that fair doesn't always look that way in a moment. Sometimes it takes looking at a bigger picture or over time, number one. And number two, it's very important for kids to know that fair and equal are not the same thing. If one kid falls down and scrapes their knee and needs a Band-Aid, and the other one feels bad that they didn't get a Band-Aid, it's fair that whoever scrapes their knee gets a Band-Aid. And if a kid feels bad because their sibling got a party bag and they don't have a party bag, sometime they'll go to a party and they'll have a party bag. That's just the way it is. But that isn't unfair. It's just disappointing in the moment. Unfair is a great euphemism kids use for disappointment. It's very smart because it gets the parent engaged, like it's a moral issue. Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm curious, you were talking earlier about this concept of being on your spot and this method of introspecting your motivation for your position and how to express that. But parenting in many cases is a two-person job. You don't have the ability to necessarily between those two positions to dominate the conversation?
You know, by and large, my feeling is one of the beauties of the two-parent system is that kids get to find out there's at least two ways the world works. And if there's a single parent, they can find that out by other friends and relatives and other grown-ups in their life. But it's great to find out that there's more than one way the world works. So I don't mind that you disagree. I do care that you don't give conflicting messages to the kids, and I do care that one or the other of you, I don't mind if you're kind of uncomfortable or not having your preference. But if it really feels of concern to you that it's happening the other way, like if you let your kids do something that your partner feels is unsafe, so your partner is anxious and worried about it, and carrying that anxiety, that's not good for anybody. So the two of you have to sit down and you have to say, I am so clear this is safe. And your partner needs to say, it may or may not be safe, but it makes me anxious, and I want that to be considered in the mix. And then you have to work that out together, what you're going to do. And sometimes we do things because it's the collective decision you came up with, even though it's not what you would do on your own. And sometimes we defer, and sometimes we get our way. But it's about learning how to collaborate and figure that out. And that's a great thing. And when I say little ears are listening and little eyes are watching, they're watching how you do that too. And learning how to work out relationships. I can take one more question, then people have to go get their kids.
So thank you for speaking to us tonight. I've read the Sexy Mom Parenting book, and I thought it was very useful. And I think a lot of what you say is mirrored in that book. It was called How to Talk to Kids So They'll Listen, and How to Listen So They'll Talk. I don't know if you've ever read the book and what you think of it, but a lot of the concepts that you mentioned tonight are in the book, and you bring a lot more to that I think would support with that. And it speaks to, and what you're talking about tonight speaks to the fact that we're learning from our kids while they're learning from us.
Absolutely.
And, parenthood has been, for me, an eye-opening experience. And I feel like I learn from them just as much as they learn from me. And, he asked the question, is all of this appropriate for a 45 or 50-year-old kid? And in reading that book and in hearing you talk about some things that sound common sense, I've learned how to speak to my children, but also my spouse differently by reading the book and taking some of those concepts to heart. So thanks for the reminder of all those things. And do you have any resources that you recommend that we read? Any books that you think are good resources for us? And maybe you don't have the list of them, but you can give a list and somebody can email them to us.
You know, by and large, I have struggled with parenting books. I'm actually struggling to write one right now with a colleague. Because one of the things that's hard is many parenting books are written with a certain thing in mind, and you look at that and you can't do that. Like this person can, like Ferberizing your kid or whatever. Like some people can do that and some people can't do that. So trying to have a book that talks to who you are, and given who you are, what's the best way to do it. So that's when I talk about screens. Lean in and learn about it, and then who you are, and what your values are, and what you're comfortable with, and what you know about your kid, and what you think through will determine what you do. As opposed to a book saying, this is what kids should be doing then, and this is what kids... No, there aren't cookie cutter kids, there aren't cookie cutter parents. So I tend not to, if anybody were to ask me what's the absolute best parenting book out there, I would say it's Runaway Bunny. I think that is a fabulous parenting book for parenting kids of all ages.
Yeah.
It says, show up where your kids are and be there for them. It's a great parenting book. So, thank you, guys.
Thank you.